Hello, this is Robert Hooks, and welcome to a special edition of the Urban Roundtable. Our guest today is one of this country's foremost experts in the field of audience development and diversification in the arts. She has worked with some of the major cultural performing arts groups, and she is president of her own company, Walker International Communications Group. I'm talking about Donna Walker-Kuhne, and she's just arrived from New York. Donna, welcome to the Roundtable.
Thank you.
You know, I've been involved in theater companies for most of my career, and I know how important audience development is. Tell the viewers, how you got involved, why you got involved, and how your company works its magic.
Certainly. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you. Thank you so much. I grew up in Chicago, and I wanted to be a dancer, a professional dancer. So I started dancing at the age of 5. And as I progressed, I realized I didn't know anyone who was making money as a dancer. So I knew that was not going to be my career. At the same time, in high school, I met an attorney who came and spoke to our class, and I said, that's what I'm going to do. And so that became my goal, was to then get into law school. So I went to Howard Law School, danced while at Howard. I always kept the passion and love for the arts. That never left me, but I wanted to make sure I had a secure future. So upon graduating from Howard, I moved to New York, I got married, and I started practicing law in family court in Brooklyn. That was not a very joyful experience.
Imagine.
And my colleagues saw that I was unhappy and suggested I do some volunteer work at a performing arts organization, which was conveniently across the street from family court. So my lunch hour was spent teaching myself how to become an arts administrator. So I taught myself publicity, fundraising, marketing, using my legal skills and transferring them to something in an arena that I really cared about. And my lunch hours extended to 4 o'clock. So when the judges started to look for me, I realized I needed to make a decision. And so I resigned, wrote a grant to pay myself a salary, and I became the managing director of the Thelma Hill Performing Arts Center. And I did that for 2 years, and then I realized I really want to be with dance. And I always admired Dance Theater of Harlem. So I wrote a letter to Arthur Mitchell. And I simply said, you should hire me. I have all these great skills. Fortuitously, my letter arrived the day his marketing director resigned. Whoa. And my interview was very brief. He just looked at me and said, can you sell tickets? I said yes, and that was it. I was hired. Gotcha. That began a 9-year journey that was absolutely amazing, traveling around the world with such a world-class company, and sitting next to Mr. Mitchell and really seeing through his eyes how one really creates brilliance. And one of the observations that we noted in America was that we weren't seeing a substantial number of African Americans in our performances, particularly in key urban cities. And so Mr. Mitchell asked me, he said, find out what's going on. And I did. I asked the presenters in Chicago, Detroit, here in LA, what are you doing specifically to reach the black community? And pretty much they all said nothing specifically. We don't know what to do. We know that we're missing this opportunity, but we don't know what skills we should apply. And that's when I developed the National Audience Development Task Force for the Dance Theater of Harlem, which was galvanizing community leaders to take ownership of marketing and promoting the company. So I would travel in advance to a particular location, identify heads of churches, cultural organizations, educators, form a group, a team, and give them the goal of increasing ticket sales. And that was an extraordinary experience. So that's how my work evolved. It was through that observation that we were missing direct relationship with our community, and reaching out to our community leaders who were more than happy to support this initiative. I just found that they needed to be asked.
And what are the challenges? In other words, how do you get these parents who are overworked?
Yes.
How do you get them involved in something like this?
Well, I believe in starting at the top. So I would ask the heads of the links. I would ask the head of the Urban League. I would ask the ministers' wives. So I would ask people who I knew understood what commitment and hard work meant. And I tried to make sure I was finding people who were passionate about the arts. So for instance, in Seattle, the mayor's wife was the head of the committee, so that I was putting in place key people. So if they said, we go to the right, people would follow them. Right. And that was the basis of my research. So I spent a lot of time looking for those key individuals. And where did I start? The black newspapers.
Wow, okay.
In the social column, everything you need to know.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's how I found them.
Now, the parents, okay, we know how you get to the parents. What about the kids? In other words, the teenagers. I mean, I know that's usually a difficult chore with the rap music and the rap videos. Does that help them being exposed to that kind of?
Oh, absolutely.
It does help.
Yes, because they can understand the history. One of the things our young people sometimes forget is that they weren't first, that there actually was someone who thought about this before you arrived. And so it's important that they're exposed to our cultural history and tradition. And that's the beauty of some of the work I've been able to do. So, for instance, in Seattle, we worked with the black community. There's about 3% African Americans in Seattle. I think I met all of them. This was in 1987, and we were on our national tour. And when I invited a lot of the community leaders to come and see the company, they called me the following day. We performed on a Tuesday. They called me Wednesday morning and said, we would like to purchase an additional performance for our young people to see these role models. How much would it cost? At that time, it was $50,000 for one performance for Dance Theater of Harlem. They said, fine. Friday, they gave me a check. They went to the fast food franchise and collected the money, purchased another performance, which we did that Monday. They brought all the kids in from the public schools. They went to Boeing Corporation to get the buses to bus the kids in, and they asked the parents to be volunteers as ushers in the theater. So that was an example of a community galvanizing, mobilizing, because they understood the value to the students, to their kids.
That's
so
amazing.
They took full responsibility for it.
Now, that's true audience developing. That really
in a very quick amount of time.
Yeah.
Less than a week.
That's amazing.
No proposals.
And you just go out and you get sponsors.
Sometimes.
You get people to, I mean, you bust, you go get, you say Boeing, to bus the kids in. Where were you in the 60s when we really needed you? Actually, I think I mentioned to you earlier that there was a very, very dear friend who did audience developing for the Negro Ensemble Company back in the 60s. And I think you know Sylvester Leaks.
Yes, I do.
He was one of the first audience developers.
That's right. There's quite a few. Woody King was one. Yes. Ida Epps, Kojo in New York. You know, I joined a group of people who have been pioneering this effort for a long time. And finally, you know, we're being embraced on a larger scale so that our work can translate in many different mediums. So it's not just theater. Mm-hmm. It's very much in dance. It's also in the visual arts. And it's in the symphonic field. So there is a huge interest, and also in the commercial industry. You know, ever since I worked on Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, Broadway producers actually realized that African Americans will pay money to come and see a show on Broadway. And I said yes, with the caveat that it is of interest, that it's not pandering to us, and that there is a sense of truth and reality in the work. And so with that, there's also been a real openness from producers to try to retain my company's services and my colleagues to help to diversify the audience.
Let's talk about your company and talk about some of the organizations that you mentioned. Donald, not Donald. Where am I with? You know, the choreo. I was thinking Donald, Bird, not yes. Donald Byrd, the Donald McHale. But you talked about Arthur Mitchell.
Yes.
And so we know about the Harlem Dance Company.
Yes.
And you mentioned Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk.
Yes.
Talk about some of the other organizations that you work with.
Certainly. Well, I was the marketing director for Dance Theater of Harlem for 9 years, and then George Wolfe called me from the Public Theater and asked me to come and make the audiences look like a subway stop. That was my job description at the Public Theater when George first came on board. And so I did that for 9 years, working with him to help translate his vision of really reflecting the society that we lived in. And that was absolutely extraordinary because George is not only a brilliant artist, but totally trusting. So I had freedom to play and experiment.
You also had a wonderful track record by that time.
And because of the experience I'd had on Broadway and nonprofit, getting clients was not so challenging.
Right.
I left the Public on a Friday, and that Monday I was working for Russell Simmons' Deaf Poetry Jam and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom with Whoopi Goldberg, and had Alvin Ailey, American Dance Theater. So it was just it's been very, very rich. And so, you know, I work a lot in the commercial world. My heart is with the nonprofit because that's where the mission is. That's where there's a sense of the future and a vision beyond box office. but really trying to embrace community. So I enjoy working with Negro Ensemble Company and Frank Silvera's Writers Workshop, Signature Theater, Lark Theater. Not all of my clients are, African American. I work with quite a few European-based entities, and I like that because they're also trying to cultivate and expand their audiences.
Now, your company is Walker International Communications Group, so how much time do you spend in the international areas?
Well, I would like to spend more, but I've been to Singapore. I was invited to Singapore to teach the arts administrators there about how to market and diversify audiences. And then 2 years ago, I was invited to come to Australia to also teach arts administrators about audience development. And I was very surprised to find out, for them, audience development was Italians and Greeks. That's who was claiming to be left out of the experience as an audience member. And I said, how strange, in America, you're considered white. We wouldn't have this conversation. But in Australia, unless you are really Anglo, you are definitely considered a, quote, minority. So I spent 3 weeks there traveling throughout the country, talking with different cultural organizations and teaching them about strategy.
Did the Aborigines figure into your...
They were not in the equation, and I requested that they be included. So they took me to the areas where the Aboriginals live, which is in the suburbs.
Wow.
In Australia.
There's a young dancer from Philadelphia who moved to Australia, who lives there, who has a dance company. Their name is Carol Rosser. And
yes,
you met Carol.
yes, I did.
How interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, and she's been there for...
I think she's in Sydney.
I think maybe so. She went over originally with Elio Palmieri. What happened to
What
him?
a wonderful choreographer.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yes.
Now talk more about, you've written a book.
Yes.
And with a fascinating title, and I must say that it is Invitation to the Party.
Yes.
Invitation to the Party. Talk a little bit about why you wrote this book.
When I finished the tour for Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, which generated $5 million from its commercial run on Broadway to the national tour in 32 cities, I was inundated by requests from presenters and producers around the country asking, how did you do it? How did you get young black audiences to come and see this production? And I thought, well, I just can't run around to every city. So why don't I write it down and everybody can see how I did it? So that was really the motivation to write this book. And I told George, I said, I'm going to write down what I just did. And he said, fine. I said, I need 3 weeks. I have no idea how I figured out 3 weeks. I've never written anything beyond a term paper. But, I said, I'm going to write a book in 3 weeks. But because I teach, I've been teaching at NYU and Columbia, Brooklyn College for over 15 years, I transcribed my lectures. And so that was the basis of a lot of my writing. And yes, in the 3-week period, I had completed pretty much the skeleton for the book. And then secured, it didn't occur to me that you get an editor first and find a publisher first.
Oh, it's the book, the world of...
the book first, and then spent the next year securing a editor and a publisher, and then moved forward with that.
Well, it's published. Is it a how-to?
Well, I believe our role is to create access. I don't believe our role is to tell a person what their cultural experience should be. I think that's very arrogant. I do believe we should open as many doors as possible, which is why reading my book would be of value, because it presents the possibilities, and why we want to make sure that you know Alvin Ailey is coming into your town, and that there's a wonderful exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or there's a great chamber performance happening down the street. But the choice is still that individual's, and I don't think that the success or failure of the campaign is based on whether or not a person decided to go. I think the success is that you really broadened the bridge, that you made the information available in the most accessible way.
Now, what importance do you place on the bottom line, making money?
Yes, which we must have because we want to live. And it's an interesting question because there's a lot of layers to that. The commercial field, that is number one. I mean, it's an express train to the bottom line. They want to know, how much is this going to generate? In the nonprofit, it's a much slower track because they understand it's a process. I mean, absolutely, at the end of the day, we want to see an increase in box office sales. My feeling is that it takes a longer time for people to get there. I think the expectation that because we're telling you we're here and this is a great event, you should come and buy a ticket, I think that's presumptuous. I do think that people will ultimately want to experience this once they have heard about it in a manner that is most interesting to them. So you heard about it at church, you saw a flyer on the church table, you read about it in your alumni bulletin, you saw your girlfriend, she told you she heard it on the radio, then you picked up a flyer in the dry cleaners, and then you got an email. Those are the layers that I think communicate the message that, yeah, let's go see this. And there's some very interesting case studies here that are doing this very well. Tyler Perry's productions are incredibly successful. And part of it's the formula, it's the art. You always lead with the art. The art, I think, dictates everything. And so because he's created a product that is very much accessible to a particular demographic, you know, his marketing for that, I think, is brilliant, and it's incredibly successful. So I think always we should be looking at best practices. And so there's a lot to be learned from how he is, you know, marketing and moving forward with his product.
Do you think that having stars involved in these productions help to attract audiences?
To a certain extent, they do. I think we have, in some way, spoiled our audiences because now we've created this expectation that there has to be a star in order for it to be good. And that makes it difficult for people who are trying to enter the field. Sure. So I think that, yes, we've created that kind. It's a handicap as far as I'm concerned. We see it a lot in New York. A lot of the nonprofit theaters now feel they have to cast huge celebrities in order to you know, make their bottom line. And so it makes it difficult for your 98% of the other actors who don't have that celebrity status.
Exactly. I like your line, and express to the bottom line. And I think bringing in a star helps to that journey, that express to the bottom line. I like that. Let's talk a little bit more about your book.
Yes.
Okay. You've just had it published. It's a how-to book, and it's what else?
It's about my life. It's about my experiences working in the arts. And I highlight a lot of the jewels that have just been remarkable opportunities that, because I had what I call my antennas up, I was able to seize the moment. For instance, while at Dance Theater of Harlem, we were deciding to go to the Brooklyn Academy of Music for the first time. This was in 1991, I think, or 92. So there was some concern because in New York, people who live in Manhattan often don't travel to the boroughs. You have to have a passport, inoculations, interviews, all kinds of things. And so they tend not to cross that bridge. Right. So there was a concern about the traditional ballet audience is not going to come to Brooklyn. And then in Brooklyn, we don't have the reputation yet. So actually, who's going to come and fill these 1,800 seats for 2 weeks? And so my job as a marketing director was to, of course, answer that question. And one of the things that happened for me was I'd gone for my annual checkup with my doctor. And she told me that she was going to her meeting after we finished. And she explained to me that she was the president of the Provident Clinical Society, which was the largest and oldest black physicians organization in Brooklyn. Who knew?
Who knew?
So I immediately
News to me.
said, exactly. I immediately said, why don't you buy out opening night? And she said, what? I said, Dance Theater of Harlem is coming to Brooklyn. Wouldn't it be great to have the black medical community welcome us? And she said, we're doctors. I said, no problem, I'll help you. So that began 9 months of my meeting with the doctors, her group, at 7 a.m. on Tuesday mornings before grand rounds to help plan how we're going to sell these tickets to these 1,800 doctors. And about a month prior to the performance date, the opening night, we looked at the ticket wraps, the sales, and saw we were only about 35% sold. And Dr. Clark said, I'm going to make a phone call. And she called the pharmaceutical companies and told them, we may have a difficult time accepting your deliveries if you cannot support our fundraisers. And so she made it happen.
Okay.
So opening night for Dance Theater of Harlem at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the headlines the following day at the New York Times Arts and Leisure section said, is there a doctor in the house? Last night, for the first time, the Brooklyn Academy of Music welcomed 1,800 members of the black medical community to honor Dance Theater of Harlem. So those kind of moments I talk about in my book where the ideas were not mine, you know, the opportunities were there and I just took them and ran. I talk about my experience in South Africa. which was really groundbreaking. Mr. Mitchell had been approached to integrate the Civic Theater in Johannesburg for several years, around 1990, 91.
This is after Mandela took...
No, this was before.
Before? Oh, okay.
Before. And Mr. Mitchell was very strict and said, we're not going to South Africa unless it is an integrated experience on every level, from tech crew to every aspect of it. And so my job was to go in advance and craft the marketing and advertising campaign. So as I entered the room of 22 white South Africans and myself, for the first time in my life, I did feel unsafe.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I really felt threatened.
Yeah.
And there was such hostility because by the time we finalized these arrangements, Mandela had been released. So there was a tremendous amount of unrest and insecurity about apartheid and where's the world going and who's going to be in control. And here I come from Harlem telling this group of, politicians and important people how I want this campaign to roll out. And so I decided to use soft power, which is, a concept that was created by a Harvard professor several years ago, in which, you engage people in a level of conversation where it's more spontaneous, more engaging, as opposed to hard power where it's very didactic and you're telling them what you have to do. You must, run 12 ads and you have to do press releases and all of that.
So soft power is the way to go.
Certainly has helped me.
Right.
And then I gave them all a gift from Dance Theater of Harlem. I had brought sweatshirts and caps. So I looked them dead in the eye and I said, this is a gift from Harlem, and we are so honored to be here and help create history together. So I was determined to move beyond the feeling that I had they wanted to lynch me. I said, we're going to move beyond that in this room today. And so by the end of the week, many of them were asking if they could serve me tea and could they fax documents for me. We were able to transform the relationship. And one of the things we realized in South Africa was one thing I couldn't do was change the law. Black South Africans had to be home by 10. They had the pass, which said you have to be inside your house by 10 o'clock. So if our show goes up at 8, you're not going to be able to be home by then. So that meant our audience members would not represent that demographic. And so we created 250 additional performances to accommodate.
Earlier to accommodate, right.
So we went to the townships and we danced during the day outside on the cement. Amazing. The dancers went to give. We also did a lot of workshops because South Africa had been completely cut off for over 40 years because of apartheid. So we did fundraising workshops, marketing. Our orchestra director, conductors were teaching music. Our board members taught board development. So it became a real cultural exchange. And that's what made, I think, the experience there very unique and not just coming in and showing off our technique, but a real exchange.
Now, staying with Arthur Mitchell and the Dance Theater of Harlem for a minute, do you think that ballet is easier accepted in Europe, a black company doing ballet? Because Arthur, I remember having conversations with him about audiences and how difficult it was because it's a ballet company.
That's right.
Has that changed? I'm sure since you came with the company and brought this magic of yours, developing audiences, it has changed somewhat. But I remember him complaining a lot about not being able to get to the audience.
It's very true. That was why we launched this audience development initiative, because the perception that I heard from a lot of the black community was that's a white art form, and we're not interested. And what I had to do was enable them to see, actually, ballet tradition is based in African dance, and that this is actually our art form. So we're first. And then secondly, look at these beautiful dancers, and look at the role models that they present to our community. So it was about educating our audiences of the value of the art. And I think as long as that is a sustained effort, the audiences will continue to grow. It's when we assume that they would want it or they get it that we see those empty seats. So it requires a focus, it requires a leadership, it requires a vision, and it requires money.
Indeed, indeed, yeah. Now, back to the young audiences and this whole hip-hop movement
Yes.
has Arthur and the rest of the dance companies in this country had to change their MO. Talk about that.
Well, hip hop is one of my favorite topics because
okay.
I think it is, in my experience, the most successful art form that has translated to a commercial success. Most of our nonprofits are really struggling, especially in the dance field. But hip hop has managed to retain its purity, starting from a basement in the 60s in the Bronx, to being a $10 billion industry that has transformed lifestyle. It is universal. It's in music, it's in cigars,
apparel,
it's in clothes, perfume.
Yeah.
So I just admire the fact that the art form is still what it is. So whether or not you agree with the language, you like the music, I think it's incredibly successful. So I encourage all of the art forms to use this as a bridge to young audiences, particularly Generation Y. You know, kids that are still in their late teens, early 20s, this is their #1 area of interest.
Black and white.
Absolutely.
And brown.
Yes. I mean, hip-hop has transformed race in a way that nothing else has in this country. And it's because it's a lifestyle. It has nothing to do with what you look like or where you live. It is a lifestyle. And P. Diddy's marketing director had written an article recently, and he talked about that. He said, look at Ashton Kutcher, you know, who wears those caps. Look at Sarah Jessica Parker wearing the big hoop earrings. Lifestyle.
Right.
Lifestyle. So hip-hop is incredibly successful. I encourage museums to use it as a bridge. In fact, the Student Museum in Harlem, they have on staff now a DJ who spins for their monthly events, so that has become a bridge to bring young people in to see the art on their walls. You know, so I think those kind of innovative ideas are very successful.
So there is a way to be true to the classics and accept the hip hop.
Yes, because it can also be dialogue-based. What we did at the Public, I mean, we didn't do any plays about hip-hop per se, but we did a lot of panel discussions where we looked at the parallels of hip-hop as storytellers, as griots, you know, and compare that with some of our playwrights today. So I think the creative ways of making those links, and we have to sometimes broaden our definition of what that means.
Right. Can you be a better hip-hop performer if you studied the classics? Or, I mean, how is, I guess you've said it, and I remember you said it. I mean, it is a form, it's there, it's been there. I remember seeing a television show in the beginning of the whole hip-hop movement, and I think it was either Dre, it was one of the early guys who said, this movement, this music and this movement is going to be around forever, and it's going to be so successful. And the other people on the panel were almost laughing at this guy. And look where we are, and this is 15, 20 years ago.
That's
maybe
right.
even, maybe even more. Wow. So it's I'm just wondering how the whole hip hop movement, how Arthur deals with it. Does he change his choreography and his presentation?
I think I don't think Mr. Mitchell has any new ballets that are necessarily resonate with the hip-hop style.
Right.
But what I think he does is embrace it as a concept. It's a class that's offered at the school, you know, so that there's a conversation that surrounds it. And I think each cultural organization has to define within our mission and our artistic purpose, how can we include this and so still retain our own purism, you know, purity. So I think that's something that's kind of case by case. With theater, I think is much easier because it can always be dialogue based. In the dance, it's a little different now. Alvin Ailey has incorporated a hip hop piece in the repertoire that made its debut last year. It was a tremendous success, and my company,
Judith has done this?
Yes, it was fantastic. The dancers you would have sworn were hip hop artists. You would never know. These were the same dancers that do Revelations and all the other.
I think that's what I was getting at earlier in my as I try to form a question for that. But Judith and the Ailey company that's amazing.
Music. And what we did for the marketing of it, we went to the hip hop clubs with palm cards and we marketed to that demographic, and we did e-blast. So our whole campaign was targeted to that population, and they came and they loved it. And of course they were exposed to the rest of the repertoire.
Right.
So that's the beauty of having bridges.
Right. What is your feeling, your take on Savion Glover and his influence and effect on the young? I know for tap, it's been amazing. What's your take on where he has come from being just a young, very young tap dancer and now being one of the
pivotal artist. I think Savion is amazing. You know, working with him on Noise Funk was just, again, an extraordinary experience, and also with his mother, because she's very closely, you know, associated with him. And one of the things I learned, the discount ticket price I had to use for Noise Funk was not used by young black teenagers, particularly males. They said, we want to pay full price because we want to sit in the orchestra and see Savion close. We want to see the beads of perspiration on his face. And so that's why I always tell presenters, please don't discount tickets as a gesture to engage young audiences. The question is not the price. The question is value. These young people valued seeing Savion close because they admired him. He was one of them who had made it to the stage. You know, so that's a very important point. But I think Savion has a tremendous influence on young dancers, on hip-hop artists, because of the brilliance. It's the brilliance. It could be, you know, there are a lot of other people who tap, but Savion is continuously exploring the art form. You know, he does a program with Bach. He does jazz. He does gospel music. So it's because of that constant stretch that he's being sought after by the world's leading artists to partner and collaborate with him. And so that continues to be this banner of brilliance and excellence in the work.
Now, his relationship or his influence, say the Nicholas brothers, we just lost Fayard just recently, but I know he was influenced by those. But what about the audiences that Savion Glover would attract? Would the older black audience who was into the earlier tap, you know, Buck and Bubbles and the Nicholas brothers and Honey Coles and those guys, are we getting those audiences? Is Savion getting those audiences to come see his?
That's a great question, and to answer it, it depends on the presenters. It depends on how they market it.
Back to
exactly. In New York, Savion performs at the Joyce Theater, which is known for innovative works and has a young demographic. He performs in Harlem. He's been at the Apollo, Aaron Davis Hall. So in New York, I think he definitely enjoys all those demographics because that's home, and we all know and love him. And so, and those artists that you mentioned were also New York based. Once he leaves New York, I think it becomes a different kind of scenario depending on how deep the marketing effort is of the venues that he's performing at.
Now that funk style of his, you know,
hitting. It's called hitting.
Hitting. Right. Oh, right. Exactly. It's wonderful. I think. But how does the Mitchell and Ailey companies is that a legitimate thing? That funk thing, is that a legitimate?
Absolutely.
Thing?
Absolutely.
It is.
Very much.
Well, you just talked about
and respect that.
Right.
Absolutely.
Savion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Savion is revered, I think, by almost any artistic
and to watch how he grew into that brilliance.
Yeah, watching a little boy on
and then all of a sudden all of a sudden it's
he's at the top.
Yeah. What is now the company, your company, what you're all over the place. You said you were out here. You were out here in California last week. You're out here this week. Is it a big staff to help you do?
Well, it's a staff of five wonderful people whom I've pretty much have groomed individually to polish the skills, one, of service, because I believe we are of service to the art, to be brilliant in the work that we do, which means we have to master our skills, and we provide marketing, press, advertising, support to arts and culture. That's what we do. So we build a campaign. So when a client comes to us, we map out how we will reach the target market and what those tools will be, and then we execute it. And so each of my staff are assigned different projects and clients based on their interest, and I supervise all of that. That's one of the services. And then I do a lot of teaching and lecturing because there's a huge interest in nonprofits to understand how to diversify their staff. Because frankly, if you internally don't represent what you're trying to accomplish externally, it doesn't resonate in any truth. And so finally, there's a reality to that. And so I'm doing a lot of staff awareness, staff diversity, for people to look at the issues of class and culture. And you have to talk about it. You have to sit down and talk about who feels better than or less than. And in America, we pretend that we are a class-less society, but we are very much a class-based society.
Indeed.
And so, this whole economic factor speaks a lot to who feels invited to come to a cultural organization. Why should I come to your theater? They're going to look at me strange. I don't make a certain amount of money. I don't travel in those circles. So we have to demystify all of that to have healthy, happy arts audiences.
We've come to know you through Melvin Taylor. Now, now tell me how he works into the scheme of things.
Melvin is one of our publicists. He works with my company.
Okay.
And so he provides wonderful, valuable services with us, as I build the team. In fact, last night, Melvin supervised and directed the opening of the Malcolm X Betty Shabazz Educational Museum and Center in Harlem.
Did that open yesterday?
Last night, yes.
Was Ms. Shabazz there?
Well, the daughters.
Yeah,
all of them, all the girls.
They were all there?
The girls were there.
Oh, okay.
The girls were there, and it was very successful. We had the TV crews there, and that's what Melvin all put
Well,
together.
because we've been in touch with him. I couldn't wait to sit down with you because of the things I've read about you, but since I've been sitting here listening to you, and you're a teacher too.
Yes, that's my first love.
Yeah.
I love
a lawyer,
teaching.
You're a teacher, and you really have your finger on the pulse of this whole audience development thing.
Yes.
And it's I think so important for you to teach others, and you are teaching others.
That's why I started teaching. I looked around at my colleagues and saw very few who looked like me. So I thought, well, I don't know what impact I can have in the hiring, but I can certainly influence the people who are in these positions to have more of a sensibility and compassion towards building communities of color and what it takes for that to happen. And so that's why I started teaching first at NYU. I'm now in my 14th year teaching there. Rarely do I have more than one student of color in a class. We do not choose arts administration as a career. People of color really don't quite understand what, my aunt who's 87, she still asks me, baby, what is it you do?
What is it you
What
do?
do you do?
Is that a real job? That
exactly.
You,
So we really, I feel that
it's
this is the most
it's
important.
handed down. Yeah.
The most important campaign right now is for us to understand that we need to be in the room. If people of color are not in the room where the decisions are being made, our art will not resonate with us. It will not have the impact that we want it to have. So that's another reason why I'm teaching to try to change that dynamic.
How important is it to bring corporate America to the table in what you do?
Excellent question. I think it is very important. One, we need their money. We need their resources, the skills, and access. One of the things that's most important to corporations is employee retention. How do you keep your employees? Because it's a lot cheaper to keep one than to get a new one. So how do you keep them? Hey, you have them happy. How am I happy? I see things around me that look like me. That's where we come in. And so I think arts organizations, particularly those of color, we could be a lot more savvy about presenting our work as part of the menu of events and activities for the employees to have access to. And so that means aligning ourselves with affinity groups. Most corporations have an African American, Latino American, Asian American, gay and lesbian corporate employee association. We should be at the doors of each one of them with our programming. Certainly during Black Hysterical Month, we should be there. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, Kwanzaa. There are just certain Black Music Month. There's certain givens that our cultural product should be the first thing they consider. I don't think a corporation should ever have to look and say, what should we put on our program? They should have a menu of about 20 or 30 of our organizations to choose from. So I encourage our organizations to be much more proactive in seeking out those partnerships. They have the budget, one, to pay for the art. Art isn't free. I believe artists should be paid. That's why I don't believe in discount, I don't believe in free tickets. I think we have to pay for it, and we have to develop the culture mentality that there's a value to it, the same way you pay for your Coach bag and your Nikes and all of those. So I think that's important, but I think the corporations provide a tremendous resource of audience members that then can be cultivated for future performances. So it's still, I think, an untapped resource.
Yeah. Now this current Latino immigration thing that we're into. Is that going to hinder or help in the things that you do?
It's expansive because, 100 years ago, 1900s, 90% of the immigrants to America were European. Today, by the year 2025, over 65% of the immigrants will be non-European. The majority of them will be Hispanic. And so that completely changes the dynamics of arts and culture, but also how we approach them, how we present our work. How is it defined? So that's one aspect. Second aspect is the blending of, quote, American families. So that 1900 years ago, you were black or white. 100 years ago, you're black or white.
Right.
Today, you could be black, Chinese, Jewish, Italian. That's one person. Mm-hmm. So how do they identify themselves? What do you check off on the census? But more importantly, what art do I want to see? Which one? And so I think in the next 20 years, the art is going to be amazing. I hope there will be a tremendous cultural explosion that reflects this diversity in our country that is no longer just one or the other, but it represents this kind of synergy of different lifestyles and cultures.
Right. I was going to ask, you talked about diversity, whether that Latin audience, that Latin movement, whether the interest in diversity is there as it is with us.
Oh, it's very aggressive. I think I sit on a number of funding panels, and I would say the majority of the proposals we read are targeting the Latino community. And so there is a huge interest to figure out how do we reach them. Is it by language? Is it by product? Is it relationships? So yes.
Because it's growing so fast.
And there's nothing we can do about it.
Right.
It's here.
And I think it's a wonderful thing, to be honest with you.
It's fabulous.
90% European as opposed to like 50% more or more in today's reality. Yeah.
But we have to be smart about it and be prepared.
Sure, sure. Talk to us a little bit about what your future plans are. I know you're going to do something here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
What is it that you're going to be doing here in Los Angeles?
I facilitate workshops for Dance USA, which is a support organization for dance companies throughout the country. And so we have a program called Dance on Tour, where we travel to 6 or 7 cities throughout the United States, helping dance companies polish skills. And I'm focusing on the marketing and audience development component. So I'll be meeting with dance companies today and tomorrow that are based in the LA area to do just that. And we've been to several other cities this year. I'm very interested in expanding my efforts with the faith-based community. I think that the congregations represent a tremendous repository of audiences for the arts. And I think there's another way for us to tap into that more effectively. Regardless of the cultural products, it doesn't have to be spiritually or religious based. I think it's a question of just making sure they see the parallels, that this is of interest and how it can be cultivated. So I definitely want to expand that.
Right. Talk a little bit about one of our stellar companies, dance companies, that I know you've worked with, Lula Washington's dance company.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about your experience with Lula Washington.
Well, I haven't worked professionally with her, but when I was here, I think it was in October, and I did another workshop, Dance USA workshop. We had it at Lula Washington's school. Okay. So we were very grateful for her opening up her school for that. And of course, speaking with her about the goals she has for her company. And I think it's the same for quite a few of our cultural organizations. We get to a certain point, there's a perception that we're not able to expand further. And I think Lula's company represents a perfect example with the financial resources that are here in LA, that she should have more, that there should be more money that is going into her school, and that should be coming from the community.
She needs you.
Yes. But
she needs your expertise.
Yes.
She needs a sit-down meeting with you, because I know Lula and I know her husband, who's
He's
also
great.
a wonderful writer.
Yes.
But they need to talk to people like you, and I'm sure you will eventually. Yeah. Because it's just such a brilliant company.
They are.
And they've gone, well, actually they're doing pretty good these days, but they could certainly use a lot of help. More.
There's, what I don't see in our culture is an understanding of giving to the arts. Still, 96, 97% of giving from the black community is to the church. We don't have the culture of giving to the arts. So for my birthday party, My birthday's June 5th.
Okay.
For
Coming
my
up.
party, yes. For my party, I'm asking for no gifts. And I'm asking for everyone to give to a cultural organization. And I'm giving them the names and the information and the envelopes because I want to expand the culture of giving to arts and culture. And it's as easy as a birthday present. It's no big deal. I don't need the scarf.
Such a beautiful
I don't
thing
need
for
the
you to do.
earrings. Please give to the arts because I want to make sure that my daughter's daughter's daughter has a wonderful menu of cultural organizations to choose from. So the investment is now.
Can a relationship, I think it would be a fantastic thing to do, a partnership between the church and the arts.
Yes. Oh, yes.
That, and I think that Perry, Tyler Perry has hit on that very successfully.
I think so. And there's some other mega churches also, as well as small churches. I work with quite a few of them in New York, and I work primarily with their drama ministries and dance ministries. And there's a real openness to understanding how they can, enhance their congregations to broaden their experience with arts and culture. But I think there's a lot more there we can mine, and that's one of the things I'm very much looking forward to doing.
Right, and I think certainly, the success that the Tyler Perrys of the world, the T.D. Jakes of the world, who are beginning to meld into the arts movement, especially in film, is very, very important. So now you're off back to New York to do...
Yes, back to New York.
To do what now?
Working with my clients. I'm working with a wonderful actress, comedian, Hazel Goodman.
I've heard.
Yeah, Hazel Goodman was the first African-American actor in a Woody Allen film.
I've heard of her, and I hear she's extremely funny.
She is. She is. And she's doing a whole summer of performances in New York, so we're mounting that campaign. Frank Silvera's Writers Workshop is having their first gala at the end of the month. Continuing with Alvin Ailey, Signature Theater is doing a season of August Wilson's works. All tickets $15.
That's amazing.
It is such a joy to work on a production of August Wilson. I've done 3 of August's plays on Broadway, and that had been an obstacle.
Yeah.
And so to now have that removed is just fantastic. So for the next 18 months, they were presenting 3 of his plays, $15.
That's amazing. $15.
Ruben Santiago Hudson is directing the first one, and we all know and love Ruben from Lackawanna Blues and many, many other things.
And from the Negro Ensemble Company.
Exactly.
I know him from back in the day.
Exactly.
Since what's the cultural stance in Harlem since Bill Clinton has moved into Harlem? Has there been any
Harlem
effect?
loves Bill Clinton. They love him. Now, I've yet to see him there, and I'm in Harlem every day. However, the fact that his office is there, and he had an African-American woman design it, and he claims Harlem as his home, has just made people feel very close to him. So, yeah, he enjoys tremendous popularity. But you know what has really been interesting that I've noticed this past year? This huge growth of black Republicans. There's quite a number of them. And they are in Harlem. They're all over. Yeah. And they're very proud to say, I'm a black Republican. I find
noticed
that dynamic fascinating.
I know. It is a fantastic dynamic. I don't quite understand it, but...
Well, they tell me that they feel the Democratic Party has made many assumptions and has not delivered.
Well, it's true.
So they're looking so for them, this is an option.
Yeah, that's a debatable point.
Very much so. Oh, yes. And I've had to draw the line because I definitely have different political beliefs, and I have to respect what my clients' beliefs are. So I choose not to discuss that with them.
Yeah, right. I can understand that. I find myself getting trapped into discussing it, and it's okay. Yeah. So now, are the audiences from downtown, I don't know if we're here yet, in New York, I'm still in New York now, going to come to Harlem?
Oh, they're coming like crazy. Harlem is, for me, my perception, my understanding that Harlem is probably the most exciting cultural arena right now for multicultural work, for innovative work. It's happening in Harlem. There is an organization called the Harlem Arts Alliance, headed by Vosa Rivers, who is a producer, director, Roger Furman Theater, And he has,
Roger.
yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And VOSA has created this organization of 400 members strong, arts organizations that meet the first Monday of every month at Riverside Church. And we meet to discuss what we're doing and how we might be able to help each other. What has come out of that is a very powerful repository of audience members. And so that most of the Broadway shows that feature African Americans now present excerpts on Broadway. Last month was a tribute to Black Broadway. We had the cast from Color Purple, Sarah Jones, Disney Productions, Lion King, I think Tarzan. They were all there because they recognize this is a very powerful entity. So then you have the Apollo,
Right.
which I've been able to be fortunate enough to work on all of the musicals that come into the Apollo.
Have they renovated the Apollo?
Yes, it's gorgeous.
Oh,
the
wow.
signage is great. Yes, the Apollo looks like the jewel that we all know that it is. But the Apollo, has changed its programming. It's not just renting out to R&B artists. They're doing musical theater, and they're doing it very
Really?
well. We started with Harlem Song. Harlem Song was the first long-running musical ever produced at the Apollo, 2002. George Wolfe wrote and directed it, and my company, we did the marketing for it. And we created the template for the Apollo to be able to partner with the Harlem community. We went to the restaurants, we brokered discount packages, we worked with transportation to bring up traditional theater goers from Midtown. We really expanded the cultural experience. And since that time, the Apollo has now produced 5 other musicals, the Jackie Wilson Story.
I didn't know they were doing that.
Oh, they're having a great time. A great
Now,
time. We did If This Hat Could Talk, the story of Dorothy Height.
Right,
We
right.
worked on. It's been really
That's
great.
great. So the Apollo, yeah, there's a whole.
Harlem is sparkling.
Now, what about the division between Black and Spanish Harlem? How is that affecting the change?
I don't think there's a lot of bridge building yet. I still see Black Harlem and Spanish Harlem. I think that there's a lot more work that has to be done. There's some organizations where it's very natural where it happens. I think, what is it, El Museo de Barrio, they programming naturally brings both entities together.
The East Harlem group.
Isn't there an East Harlem cultural organization that's...
East Harlem, I don't know.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's Aaron Davis Hall, which programs a lot to both communities. So there's some organizations that are trying to do it, but I think as a whole, that's an area to expand.
It's an area to expand. There needs to be work there.
But see, what's happening in Harlem, you have this amazing demographic change. You have so many other people that are now moving into Harlem, which is being driven by real estate. One of my clients is the Lenox, which is a luxury condo in Harlem. It's right there on Lenox, 129th and Lenox, 5 blocks from the Apollo. And we are bringing in, people who are not necessarily African Americans who can afford to buy these $1 million penthouse apartments. And so you have this different culture that's coming in with expectations, as well as your traditional Harlemites who've been there for many years. So it's really changing what people expect to see culturally and what's being delivered.
What about, I know you know about this organization. She's a dear friend of mine, Barbara Ann Tears of
Yes.
National Black Theater.
Yes.
Do you have any contact with her, working with her?
She's not a client.
She was?
No, she's not a client of mine, but we're certainly colleagues. And whenever I am working on projects in Harlem, I reach out to all of the major 9, which is called the Harlem Strategic Cultural Collaborative. And those are the large 9 Harlem arts institutions that own their own home. And I think they've been around for over 30 years. So that's how I'm able to interact with Barbara, is making sure that she knows about this and that we're doing cross-promotion, and helping to expand our product. But she's very respected, highly revered in the Black community, and the NBT continues to produce really great work.
Well, I asked the question because I do know the effect that she has on the...
And how she fought to keep that building.
Oh, indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to her. She said, I am not giving up. So she owns it. It's hers, and it's a beautiful building.
And she owns a few townhouses, too.
Yes, she does.
No,
she's a smart, savvy
very smart
businesswoman.
And from a very smart East St. Louis family, too, and they taught her well.
Okay.
Now, I mentioned to you earlier, before we sat down to talk, that My executive producer, Milton R.F. Brown, and I have been working hard to build the groundswell for a performing arts center here in Englewood. You talked about George Wolfe, and I know the work he's doing in New York. Hopefully one day we can get him out here, sit down and talk to us about what we want to do here. But what is your feeling about a performing arts center, just in general, in a city like Englewood, which was at one time almost all black?
I think it's critical. I think you should go for it 2,000%. It's desperately needed. Performing arts centers provide such a value to the community because you can find everything under one roof. You know, it allows for producing, presenting. It allows for a venue where people can come and play. I think it brings a tremendous amount of value, cultural tourism to a neighborhood. So by having a performing arts center, you're driving traffic to a particular community where dollars are going to be spent beyond those four walls. People are going to want to eat, they're going to park, they're going to want to take advantage of all the other resources.
Well, we're a hop, skip, and jump from LAX, too. I mean, we're right at the airport.
Yeah, it took us 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think there's a great economic impact that the center will have, as well as culturally, as well as a place for young people to come and create their work. And first level, first class artists coming to present as well. So please go forward.
Well, there's a tremendous real estate development thing happening here in Englewood. The racetrack and this whole Englewood area is going to be renovated.
Wow.
We would like to have your input when we open the doors to, not the doors necessarily, but when we start moving in the right direction for this performing arts center. We'd like to call on you to
I would be delighted.
share some of your expertise in a professional manner.
Of course. Consider it done.
Well, we want to try to build that link between Harlem and Englewood because there's some similarities there as it relates to the black communities. But it would be nice. I'm just thinking about the people. Like, I was really looking forward to sitting down and talking with you because I know the work that you're doing is so important, and your vision of developing audiences and the whole diversification thing is just amazing. And it's just been such a pleasure. I don't want to end this conversation until I talk a little bit more, because I want to know, can our audience, our viewing audience, pick up this book?
Yes, they can.
This
They
book
can
on
go.
sale?
Oh, yes. Amazon.com.
Okay,
They can get
go
it.
on Amazon.com.
Or they can go to the TCG.org website. TCG are the publishers of this. In New York, it's at several bookstores, but not nationally yet. I need the viewers and audience members to demand that it be in various stores. I know in Atlanta, it's at Borders Bookstore, but primarily you can get it now, I think, Amazon.com if you're outside of New York.
Right.
Let us see that wonderful book of yours, Invitation to the Party. Thank you so much for coming to the Roundtable, sitting down with me.
Thank
I've had a
you.
wonderful time.
It's been great.
So thank you so much, Donna.